I actually should quickly say before I introduce Rose that we are recording this first part, the session today. So Rose's presentation, the expert Q&A, we will not be recording the workshopping component that is happening in this room later on. So just so everybody is aware of what's happening there. So our expert, Dr. Rose Amazan. Rose is a senior lecturer in the School of Education at UNSW. She has extensive experience working with low SES communities in Australia and internationally. Rose's expertise resides in two strands of research: social justice in education, pathways to educational equity, and international education and development policy with an emphasis on gender. Rose's research, teaching, and service activities are motivated by her commitment to community development and creating equitable and safe environments for marginalised and disadvantaged communities. So thank you so much, Rose, for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for having me. I'll try my best to look over here for the people online as well as the people in the room. So it's a bit hard to navigate and manage, but thank you so much. And thank you, Brooke, for that introduction there. All right, well, before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge country, which trying to figure out how do I move to the next slide here. There we go. I would like to do an acknowledgement of country, and I do a lot of work in Aboriginal communities, and a lot of time you hear a lot where the community members and elders always say, you know, when people have presentation, they just do the tick box of acknowledgement and they sort of keep moving forward. So I'm trying to do an extensive one here, so I don't fit that category. But I would like to acknowledge country where we're meeting. We are on Bidjigal land. The La Perouse community is not too far from here. I'm not sure if you've ever been there, but I would highly recommend you there. It's so beautiful. We do a lot of work there in a big project. I'm working with Professor Kevin Lowe around the whole school approach in terms of school reforms in school with Aboriginal communities, but also teachers and educators there at the school. But I'm also wanting to use this photo here. And I'm not sure if you've heard, a few weeks ago, Victoria has definitely put their, in Parliament, they put their treaty, which is really good and it's great to see. So it's the first Australian state that has done that. I'm looking forward for New South Wales to do the same. And this to me signified so much. And I know the referendum was a big blow, not only for a lot of people who supported, but a lot of Aboriginal communities as well. But to see the treaty making happening still, I think that's wonderful, including our own university have started micro treaty processes, which is wonderful to see. And for me, that signifies an acknowledgement of the colonization, the dispossession, the harm and the violence that has been done. But I also want to say that it's not really a gift, you know, it is definitely something that needed to be done and something that really shows, you know, a path and a movement toward reconciliation, what reconciliation look like and feel like. And I want to read you this quote here that I found online of someone who was talking about this, and they were saying, you know, this sort of reminding that reconciliation is not a moment, but a movement, one that requires courage, accountability, and respect. And I quite like that because I think this particular session around intersectionality, I'm hoping to do that, to acknowledge and respect your participants, those who give you the sacred stories and trust you with them. And so what do you do and how do you represent them in a way that does justice to them? But that's also, it's ethical, and also telling the truth-telling process that we're wanting to do so that we don't perpetuate the same old narrative and stories about different marginalized groups. So I just thought I do that. So today I'm hoping to discuss intersectionality and how we can try our best to include it into practice, into our research. Usually I talk a lot about intersectionality with our educators. I work in the School of Education, so I train teachers, pre-service teachers. So we talk a lot about that. What does that look like in schools with your students and so on. So today, I want to focus on the research component aspect and what does that look like in practice. And we'll talk about some of the challenges and the critiques around the term as well. But hopefully we'll get a chance, especially afterwards, to dive in and have a look at what that could look like. Because there are messiness in that as well. It's not neat, it's not a neat package as whatsoever. So I'm using Audre Lorde here, and Audre Lorde is a Black feminist from the States. She's a political activist. So I moved too quickly here. She's a political activist, and her work that she's done is definitely around that. And she does a lot of work around trying to push back against just identifying her as one type of way. You know, she was a Black woman, she was feminine, she was a feminist, she's also a lesbian, categorized herself as a lesbian, and she wanting to really push back against sort of trying to box her into one form of way and one form of identity. And she really wanted to celebrate all parts of herself equally. And so this particular quote here, where she said, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live in single issues lives. And that is true for us as researchers as well. You know, we research people and individuals. They are complex. They are never one type of story. There are multiple stories overlaying. And so how do we represent that is not easy. It's quite complex. But I think, you know, having it in the front of your mind, I think sometimes is very important because it makes you conscious of things that you need to do and not do. All right. So this is a bit ambitious, but I think some of it is purely for the talk, which is about half an hour. And then the rest of it is us workshopping and working together. And I just want to say here, I forgot to mention this, but I thought I'd reiterate that, you know, this particular space, it's not really for perfection or perfectionists because it's not, it's quite messy. So I'm hoping we create a space for curiosity, reflection, and co-creation together. Because I might have lived intersectionality, but I also do research in that area. But at the same time, I think all of us bring something else to the table. So I'm also wanting to learn and share with you in that space. So wanting to look at intersectionality broadly, an overview, I can spend weeks and weeks talking about the concept of intersectionality. So hopefully we already have some pre-knowledge that we're coming in about what intersectionality is, so we don't spend too much time dissecting that, but hoping to dive into what does it look like in practice and research. And understanding the frame of intersectionality as a frame for research design and so on. And one of the ways that I think it's important to dive in, and we'll discuss this, is our positionality. And hopefully you have started thinking about that. You have started reflecting on yourself, your positionality, your upbringing, your privileges, and how does that then impact what you do, how you do it, and how you look at data that you're going to be receiving. And then the workshop bit, we're going to be diving in, looking at some samples, which 3 of you have generously shared. So we're going to look into some of them and have some discussions. All right, let's pause a minute and check in. So I'm hoping that we are wanting to reflect here a little bit before we dive in. So just wanting to check about, I guess, checking in with your pre-knowledge of where you sit at the moment. So these 2 questions I would like, if you wanting to go on the chat and put that in the chat, and those of you who are here can also think about this. What does intersectionality mean to you, you know, as an individual? And where do you hope to grow it in your own research? So I'll give you a minute or 2 to think about that. So I'll give you about a minute or 2. And you can drop your thoughts in the chat. And those of you who are in the room, you can jot some points down and we can share maybe for a minute or two. Maybe one more minute. Those of you online, I don't know if is the chat live? Can they write in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's live. I can read it out. I can see just the little 3 dots, and there's a few people writing things.
Okay.
But
So
we probably can't see
might,
what they are yet.
I might need your help, Andy, because
Yeah, no worries.
it's yeah. Thank you. Do we need one more minute or are we good?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's start with those online. We can't see in the chat there, Andy. So you're gonna have to help us. Anyone have something written online?
So yeah, we've still got the 3 little dots, but maybe like Clue, did you want to maybe? Oh, here we go. Monica's typed
Yeah.
something in. So Monica said that they're new to intersectionality, so have a basic understanding of considering how it means considering the interactions between different identities and those implications for people. And then Monica also says that they're hoping to learn more about incorporating those within research with organizations.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Monica. All right, let's take someone here in this room who would like to share.
Sure.
Thank you.
So intersectionality, I know about it from a theoretical perspective and Kimberly Crenshaw, but also it's essentially the idea that combinations of different factors in your identity combine in not an additive way, but more of a multiplicative, it's conceived mathematically as a multiplicative way, or a different mathematical or conceptual relationship between each other. And that's important because it's hard to separate things, harder to separate things that are being multiplied together than it is to separate things that are being added together based on those mathematical relationships. And then what I don't think as a researcher, as me and my supervisors, conceptualizing our own identities and how that influences our lenses on the project. But also, I work with young people with intellectual disability, so I want to understand their relationship to the topic of self-determination and their own personal identities in a more complex way, and recognizing that it's not just youth and intellectual disability, but lots of things connecting, and those things mysterious interactions.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. All right, we'll take one more online and then we'll move on. I can see Chloe's one.
We've got two more.
Yeah,
we've
great.
got 2 more. So Clue is up first. So Clue said it means honest embracing of the complexity of our lives and struggles, making the effort to meaningfully incorporate that into practice. And that Clue is always seeking to grow in their knowledge and critical appraisal of the work that they do, to consider power structures and intersections of harm and resistance in the work within, at work within.
Great. Excellent.
And Vassida said something similar, a framework and a way of understanding the plural nature of individual people's identities, a framework and a way of understanding different systems of power and oppression and how they interact with one another.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of that, you know, you're going to continue to change, you know, as you become a researcher, you grow in different ways. And those of you who are just starting out, you know, your understanding and depth of understanding is going to move forward and change. But thank you so much for sharing that. And we'll continue to discuss some of that and bring some of those, your own experiences and knowledge into that as well. Thank you very much. All right. So what is intersectionality? Now you can Google this, you can put it in any AI, you know, bot, and then you find out the answers. And so I don't want to spend too much time on what it is, but I also want to figure out, you know, how do you work with intersectionality as well? So I have a little quick video. I hope, Andy, this is going to work. This is very basic video just to give us the basics, because I think I'm not sure in the spectrum of your knowledge around intersectionality where you sit, but if you don't have that.
What is intersectionality?
Yep, all good.
Intersectionality refers to the way race, gender, class, sexuality, and other parts of who we are overlap with one another. People from different backgrounds experience the world differently. Intersectionality helps explain how parts of who we are come together to determine who has power in our society and who does not. People are complex, and many factors contribute to our identities and experiences. We cannot look only at one part of our humanity. We have to look at the whole picture and all the factors that impact our identity and experience in society.
Again, there are a lot of videos out there. You can have a look, but I just thought I'd give just a basic a video.
Can I confess something, Lama?
I'm all ears.
Since you recommended Monday that comes to
Sorry.
blocks, work got so much easier.
I know.
You know I'm in sales, right?
Yes.
Did you know that with AI?
Yep. Please stop. He's close.
Oh my God, what a
boy.
thing to try to intrude.
I know, right? Very rude, very, very rude. I'm trying to do slideshow. Wait, I'll just have to go back again, sorry. All right, so when we look at intersectionality, one of the books that I like to read, I do a lot of participatory action research. I work in Aboriginal communities, so participatory action research is something that I use quite a lot, actually, in my whole research. And Caroline Lynette, Professor Caroline Lynette from from the ADA faculty, has written this book, which I keep by my desk, and it's all like, you know, written and worn out because I refer to it quite a lot. And she talks about intersectionality in the context of participatory action research. And when we do our workshop, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I'm going to use some of her writing to really deepen our understanding of what that is. So one of the sections she writes, intersectionality is a framework for understanding the ways that multiple aspects of our identities intersect, which is what you hear from the video there, influence one another and compound to create unique experiences as well. So the concept is regularly used to describe the ways that societal privilege and oppression is complicated by the different parts of our identities that are marginalized or privileged in our society. So you heard earlier, it's Sonia, isn't it? Ciara, sorry, Ciara.
Okay,
Ciara earlier in the room talked about Kimberly Crenshaw, which is, she's actually been sort of, I guess, been known to be the person that actually come up with that term and concept. However, you know, Jen, I think Gita Sen in the 1980s started talking about intersectional inequalities in her work before Kimberly actually came and talked about that. So yes, so she is credited, Kimberly Crenshaw is credited, but really there has been work previously before that in the early 80s with Gita Sen in India that has spoken about that. But definitely Kimberly, 1989, she's a legal scholar, did indeed come up in her work working with her different clients. She does realize there were some issues there in terms of intersecting inequalities, in terms of working with Black women and where laws were, I guess there were some laws that covers the race aspect and some laws covered the gender, but not, the sort of overall complexities of things. So Crenshaw was definitely the one to sort of expose institutional discrimination and marginalization, and she named it and show how feminist and anti-racist initiative could reinforce existing power dynamics rather than lead to transformation and change, because such initiatives ignore race or gender. And so, in looking at that, this is, I guess, something for us to really think about. So I'm referring to intersectionality, looking at race and gender, but there are other things as well. We have religion, we have class, we have, all sorts of other aspects of our identities, of the makeup of who we are that also intersects. So some things, yes, of course.
We've not talked about the context here so far, because apart from different aspects of identity, the context matters. In some contexts, a particular identity characteristic is fine, and in a different context, it becomes marginalized or privileged. So
Absolutely.
then how do we take that into account? Will we discuss that?
Yes, absolutely. I think context is a big one. For example, I mean, one of the critique of intersectionality talk about the westernization of the concept, such that intersectionality looks very differently from Australia than it would be somewhere, if I go, in Ethiopia or somewhere else. So the context is part of that, for sure. Thank you, but we will definitely dive into that. So thank you for that. And please, if you have questions, I'm happy to take them as we move along. So these are some of the core principles of intersectional research. I want to focus a little bit now on research, and of course, we can spend a lot of time to talk about what intersectionality is, but as well as the research component, I want to look into that a bit deeper. So I have some notes here. So one of the things that I want to highlight is that intersectionality is not just about adding categories, like race and gender. It's also about understanding how systems of power and oppression interact. And you mentioned the idea of context. Absolutely, context plays a role within that when we talk about power and how that actually shapes experience, as well as, the way we do research. Oppression and power. Power is a big aspect when we think about intersectionality. So recognizing how privilege and disadvantage are linked together is also part of that. When we think about doing research and considering intersectional ways of thinking about it. Relationality is another big one, and I do a lot of research with Aboriginal communities, and that is in the center of everything that I do, that relationship. So analyzing relationship between identities and structures, and they're not isolated traits either. Yes.
Will we be getting a copy of the slides?
I can circulate it later if that's helpful. Yeah, sure.
And it's also being recorded, this first part.
Yeah.
So the recording will be made available.
Oh, yeah, that's true too. So through the recording, you can get a copy as well, but yeah, absolutely. The complexities acknowledge the multiple and dynamic social positions. Again, when we think about a sort of a privilege in our society or wherever context that we are, that in itself can change over time as well. So there is also movement and fluidity in those type of things that we need to think about too. Context, as we were talking about before, situate findings in historical, cultural, and spatial context is quite important. And comparisons, examining differences and similarities across different groups is something that we need to think about when we think about the principles. And the deconstructions, like looking at questions and unpacking the fixed sort of social categories sometimes that are assigned to a lot of different people. So we got to think about how do we interrupt that and disrupt that so that we can really think deeply when we think about these things. So I guess here on this slide, I just want us to think about it is important that we remember that adopting an intersectional lens will require a very deep reflection and sometimes uncomfortable conversations as well. That discomfort aspect of it is part of that too. So as we try to identify how we as advocates consciously or unconsciously contribute to minoritization, it also requires a serious commitment to change. One areas of concern have been identified. So I want to emphasize here the context and power aspect plays a role here. So why take this approach? It's complicated, it's messy, it's not neat, it's not in a nice package, but these are two things that I put. I'm sure there are many more we can think about the reasons behind why. So it really does provide us a framework to be inclusive and also to consider unique experiences of individuals in our research. And another reason I will put forward here, an argument, is that it really helps us to recognize the importance of individual social identities within the bigger context and also systems as well. And the structures of power. I'm going to keep repeating that word power. That really reflect the macro as well, the micro as well in terms of privilege and oppression. So those are two things that I would think about of why really I do a lot of intersectional research and why I think it's important if you are doing research to consider intersectionality as an aspect. And I'm sure there are many other reasons as well, and we can discuss that a bit further. Now I spoke about earlier, I'm going to go back a little bit. I spoke a little bit earlier about the idea of discomfort, and I do want to differentiate the idea of discomfort, feeling uncomfortable and feeling unsafe as well. And it's important for us to really tune into that, you know, discomfort and uncomfortability in doing intersectional research is, you know, is part of the fabric of it. But the unsafe aspect of it, you know, we have to think about that. You know, how do we create that safe space such that, you know, people are able to, you know, trust us and tell us the stories that they would like to share with us. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So when we think about designing intersectional research, for example, these are some of the points I put down here. And again, I'm sure there are many other ones to think about, but these are just some of the ones that I think about that that's at the forefront of my mind all the time. So we got to think about moving beyond that additive thinking, which again, Sonia has said earlier. So avoiding that treating identities as separate variables, but focusing more in that sort of interactions between the different identities. Planning from the start. Now, a lot of times I think people sort of want to sprinkle this idea across, which, you know, it's an approach. But if you're really serious and really wanting this to be part of the fabric of your own research, think about planning it from the start, incorporating intersectional research from your questions that you start, your research questions, your sampling, your data collection, basically all stages of your research. Engage lived experience. So I use participatory action research to do a lot of my intersectional research. Community-based participatory research is also another approach to center marginalized voices. So let's say you are researching an area whereby you don't have lived experience in that area. Participatory action research is a really good way of doing that research, because then you can have co-designers and your participant can become your co-researchers, such that you can really capture the nuances and also, I guess, the true lived experiences of those individuals. Dynamic categories here. I said recognize that relevance of categories like gender, class, changes across time and context, which is what I mentioned before. So I'll give you an example for myself. You know, I grew up quite poor. So if I have a look at the privilege aspect of it when I was a kid, it will be very different now because, you know, I'm educated, I have a job that pays, you know, fairly okay. So in terms of my class, that shifts a little bit. So try your best not to keep people in a particular category because over time it does change as well.
It almost seems to me like it is always a point in time, isn't it? The intersectionality.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you look at a point in time in which you look at intersectional, maybe a group of your participants, and look at it a year later, maybe the intersectional will be quite different.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, there are some common misconceptions about intersectionality. As I mentioned earlier, you know, it is messy. It can be a little bit more, just more time in terms of thinking about how to make it work. These are a few, and I'm sure there are more. One misconception is this idea of additive identity labels, which we spoke about. So you can understand someone's experience by simply adding up their identities, which, you know, we're saying actually the reality is not that. You know, intersectionality is about how these identities intersect in a complex, context-specific way, and not just stacking them up like building blocks. All right, so that's one misconception. The other one, it's only about identity. So intersectionality is just a way to describe people with multiple marginalized identities. And the reality of it is it's a frame. It's a frame for analyzing system of power as well, oppression and privilege, and also how racism and sexism and homophobia, etc., intersect and reinforce each other. So that's one myth I want to sort of break there. The third one is it's only for qualitative researchers. Intersectionality can't be used in quantitative studies. And quantitative studies, again, there's always been pushback in terms of embracing and accepting some of these things, but it is challenging, definitely quantitative methods, but there are definitely multi-level sort of like modeling that can be adapted, you know, to reflect intersectional complexities. So it can be done, it has been done. One of the readings that I gave is an example of how that works. It's a buzzword or diversity add-on. Intersectionality is just a trendy term to signal inclusivity. It's a rigorous analytical tool, you know, if it's done well. It really demands, you know, really deep engagement with theory, context, lived experiences, you know, using superficially undermines really that transformative sort of way of the potential of that, the transformation of that. All intersections are equally salient, so every identity intersect matters equally in every context, and we just spoke about that. That is not the case at all. So the salient of race, gender, class, sexuality, etc. shifts, depends on the situation, the geography, the historical moments. So intersectionality does require contextual sensitivity. So something we need to think about. Number 6, it's just about marginalization. Intersectionality only applies to oppressed groups, and we hear that a lot, you know. So it really helps to analyze privilege, which is part of that, and also certain intersections as well. For example, white, male, you know, wealthy, and so on. So, you know, that confers systemic advantages to can be looked at through the lens of intersectional research. Now, intersectionality in practice, I'm not sure how we do it with time. But I sort of gave, these are some examples of how, you know, you can see intersectionality in practice. I tried to pick sort of some readings that I'm familiar with that gives a little bit of those of you who do quantitative research and others of you who do, you know, more qualitative research, and as well looking at the design, the research design aspect of it as well. And the Routledge International Handbook of Intersectionality Studies is a really, really good one. I highly recommend you have a look at that if you're thinking of doing that kind of research. You just have, you know, very different ways of thinking about it. Now, I'm not going to give a summary of those readings. We can definitely discuss them in our workshop, but I just thought I'd highlight a couple of things from the readings that I would like us to think about. So the first one is One is how participants often resist being fragmented into separate identities. Especially the first reading really talk about that, the fragmentation that happens in research sometimes. Even the way when you interview someone and you don't give a narrative or the context, you just chop the quotes and it's like the person is quite fragmented in your representation of it. So the first reading really talk about that. And of course, especially in traditional quantitative methods as well, that occurs, in terms of isolating those variables of race, gender, and sexuality. So it really treats sort of marginalized groups as these statistical anomalies in some ways. So, those readings really talk about that. The importance of context as well, again, going back to that, relationality and power in interpreting qualitative data. Our interpretation of the qualitative data is a very important point in which that could, your practice in terms of practice intersectionality could really come through. That's why it's important to talk about positionality, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So how intersectionality can be operationalized in qualitative research design. These readings also talk about that. So well, let's move on to the next pause. I'll pause here for a minute. Any questions before we move on about what we said? Yes.
It seems like intersectionality is really dependent on identity categories.
Mm.
And there are other theories that are talking about deconstruction of categories.
Mm.
So how do those two things sit with each other?
Yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else? Anyone want to respond to that or?
Because I read the papers yesterday, I used to thought that intersectionality only for some special group, but I think it's a general common concept for all people, not just for some special group.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else online? Anyone online want to add? Yeah. All right, well, let's pause a minute here. How does intersectionality show up or get missed in your own field? Or where do you see gaps in current research practices? I'm sure some of you have already started doing your lit reviews and looking at the literature. Perhaps you have already seen some gaps and that's why you're interested in knowing more and also in wanting to know how to break that cycle and not repeat the same things that you are seeing. So I'll just leave those two questions for you to think about, for especially those of you online to really ask questions of your own sort of research around that and of yourselves as well. Okay, so this is another quote here from Romeo, and I'm using this quote here because, with any sort of approach or framework that you use in research, there are going to be some positives and negatives. There are going to be some challenges. It's up to you depending on what are you willing or able to sort of take on. And I think this quote here by Romero is quite a really good one because it really talking about, the challenges and how do we push through forward. So he said here, intersectionality is dynamic and interdisciplinary. It asks us as researchers to consider a wider range of potential interpretations. Therefore, intersectionality should be reconsidered and reconceptualized in ways that incorporate what we know now to interrogate what we do not know yet. And that's what it's about, right? We don't do research because we already know the answers, right? We do research because we want to find the unknown, the gaps that exist. So I love the idea of for us to really think as researchers to reconceptualize and reconsider what we know now, such that we can use that to interrogate what we don't yet know. So that I thought was quite a really great quote. It really captures what we are trying to do, because sometimes we dive into a space we're unsure about how to navigate it. And sometimes it's too complicated. We want him to just get on with it. But I think sometimes in between the spaces of that complication is where you find something very different, where perhaps you can get answers that were not already there and exist. All right, I think I'm looking at the time, and in terms of time, I think this is where I'm gonna I'll take a couple more minutes, two more slides, and then after that, I think I'll stop. I'm using this book here. It's a children book. I have two little girls, and I think a lot about how I encourage them to be themselves, their full selves, as much as we can. And I quite like this book because I think it talks about this idea of identity. You know, we always talk about what is our identity and what are some of the things that form our identity and are included our values and so on, where we grew up, people relate to it and all that stuff. And at the core of it, this idea of all of who I am, you know, the factors into our identity. And some of them are visible, some of them are not so visible. So there's a quote up there in that there. I don't know if you can read that quote. Again, I quite love this. It said here, when the sun paints the sky pink and orange and blue, with its light that is brilliant and clear, I say, I want to make the world beautiful too. And the sun says, that's why you are here. Yeah, I know. It's quite a beautiful quote. So I guess I want us to really think about that. You know, I want us to really reflect on that. And we don't have time at the moment to really think about it, but I thought I'd just drop it in. Perhaps when we come back together, we can really think about what does that make you feel and think about as well in terms of yourself. And in thinking about ourselves, our positioning, our privileges, our perspectives, then we can't help think, then how does that then influence the work we do, our interpretation of the work and the individuals we interact with within our research. So the people online who won't have a chance to talk about positionality and do a little bit of positionality, but I have two slides I would like you to consider after this. So one is about doing a positionality mapping, if you haven't done so yet. Who am I in relation to my research? Where do I hold power? And where do I experience vulnerability or exclusion? I think it's important for us to be reflexive, not just reflective, but reflexive about who we are and be honest about that, be truthful. And I think, especially when we're doing research with groups, perhaps we don't have the lived experience. I think for us to be upfront and honest about perhaps our gaps in knowledge, our lack of experience, I think the participant appreciate that. You need to find a point of entry, but also a point to connect with people and the stories that are being told to you. So doing this work with yourself is really important. And I highly recommend anyone who's doing any sort of research need to really think about that, especially around your motivation, looking at your privilege, really thinking about how it really influenced the research process and your motivation for doing what you're doing and how you're doing it. So this is the activity, the first activity. I'm gonna leave the groups online to do that, and perhaps together we can do this together. So this is an activity I sometimes use with students to really start thinking about your privilege and start really thinking about those questions that I asked there about your power, your perspective, your privilege. So this little activity here, talk about that. So thinking about the part of my identity that I'm most aware of on a daily basis is the part of my identity that was most emphasized or important in my family growing up was the part of my identity that provides me the most privilege is the part of my identity that I believe is the most misunderstood by others, the part of my identity that I feel is difficult to discuss with others who identify differently is. So this is just a starting point. You know, if you wanting to dive deeper and know yourself a little bit more, I think it's important for you to know yourself a lot, especially when you in the space that requires that of your participants. You need to do that hard work for yourself too. So, so I highly recommend to get that process ongoing. So this is my last slide, and after that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions. So when you do that positionality work, which we're gonna do together, and for those of you online, I highly recommend you do, and thinking about what we've been discussing, I would like to think about what are the implications of that on your research. What sort of type of research would you like to be at the end? And I want you to be intentional, because we have to be intentional if we're wanting to do something very different. If we don't want to do the exact same thing all the time and wanting to be in this space of intersectional research. So these are some points. And again, we may have more points we can think about. Embrace reflexivity and positionality to ensure that research does not reproduce systems of oppression. Research does that. That's why a lot of marginalized groups, they don't want to participate, especially working with Aboriginal communities. You know, they've been researched so much and they're like, well, we've been researched so much. Exactly, what has been done? Like, why are we doing the same thing? So that's one thing. Avoid treating intersectionality as an afterthought or special case in diversity research. And again, people, you know, stumble upon it and they thought, oh, I'll sprinkle it here and there. Again, that's some way to do it. But really, if you wanted to do it authentically and genuinely, you need to think about it throughout your process. Develop and adapt methods that reflect how identities co-constructed experience rather than simply occur. So what I mean by that is we really have to think about, you know, different ways of doing sort of research that perhaps that provides different opportunities for us to be able to bring about maybe new answers that were not there before. And I'll give some examples there of frames for the quantitative researchers. There's an intersectional framework like the Mahada that actually really helps in terms of looking at intersectionality. And that's sinful multi-level analysis of individual heterogeneity and discriminatory accuracy. That's the acronym for that. I'm not a quantitative researcher, but I thought I'd just mention it to you because I know some people's using that. Collaborate with communities, use participatory methods, and ensure findings are accessible and actionable. Again, in my research, that is the point in which I'm checked. You know, like checking, what do I mean by that? Like, am I doing right by the people that I'm researching? Like, and doing it collaboratively with people, co-designing it, having participatory methods within your research really helps you to check yourself. And so that I highly recommend that. That's really important. Intersectionality should guide every stage of the research, not just add it as a theoretical lens. Again, some people do that, but we gotta reflect about that. Researchers must be intentional about capturing complexities and resisting reductive categories. If we're not intentional, then it's quite superficial what we're doing. And that's fine. If that's your intent too, that's that. But if we really want to do something very differently and think really deeply about these sort of things, then you have to plan for it. It cannot just happen sporadically. You know, you have to plan for it. And of course, research is unpredictable, but at least you plan for that intentional way of doing research and doing it differently. All right, I think I'm gonna stop here because the next phase, I'm gonna end with Audrey Lord here. There is no hierarchy of oppression. I can go in to talk about what she means there, but have a look at the video and have a look at her work as well. She was a poet, so she's written a lot about that. I think I'll stop here. I want to say, those of you online, thank you so much. Sorry you weren't able to join us in the room, but hopefully you were able to get something out of the discussion and the talk. I'll open it up now if you have any questions. Here is my slides for questions. Any questions, either in the room or maybe the people online, perhaps, because those of you in the room, we're gonna be together. Yeah. So any questions online?
So folks online, if you've got a question, you can just turn your mic on and ask the question, or put your hand up and I can call you out. Iran, you have got your hand up.
Yes. Hi, sorry, it's something wrong with my camera, so I'll just talk.
No worries.
Yeah. I do have a question about, because in one of my research on immigrants, I found that during the process of conducting, recruiting participants, etc., I noticed that older male immigrants they seem to have more like self-shame, stigma around mental health needs. Because back in their own country, they probably, let's say head of the family, etc. They have the privilege there. But now they, after retirement, they came to this new home, new country to them, and they actually suffer more. But they are so hard to reach. So I do have this intersectionality I have it in my theory and in the process of my research, but it's in real life when I try to optionalize it, there's just very hard to reach them because of these multiple factors they face, and they just very reluctant to participate in research.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's any suggestion, any tips? Yeah.
Great question. Yes, I think sometimes let's think of it this way, right? So if I'm female, a Black female interviewing a white male, the kind of answers that I get comparing to a white male interviewing another white male, right? So there are going to be differences in terms of approach. I know we don't want to believe that. We think about gender equality and all that stuff, but the reality is there is that interaction. And then you bring in the cultural aspect, overlay that on top of it. And then you bring in the age factor if you're a younger person talking to an older person. So there's so many different layers of things that can lay over it that might make it challenging, or for you to consider whether you're the right kind of person to ask certain types of questions for you to get the answers that the real answers that you would get. It is complicated. I'm gonna throw it to the room here as well as there to see if there are any suggestions and thoughts around that.
We tried partnering up with another person who can be a bridge with those people, with the male migrants that you're wanting to talk to, or speaking to. Sometimes there's like support groups that specifically focus on migrants, that like men's groups, men's sheds or something like that you might be able to connect with, and create and build trust, even just by like doing a talk about something else to build trust, like helping out in some way.
Yeah, great point. Right. So reflecting to my positionality. So it's not just as a researcher, I'm aware of my positionality. I also need to see through the participants' eyes, like how they would see me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've done some research with some migrant communities, and it is not easy to interview older migrant male. I was a young researcher starting out, like it's a whole different situation, and especially the cultural aspect of it overlaying it, so my interaction with older women was also very different, but that in itself, I think it's a finding, you know what I mean? Like that in itself to me is also exposing layers of power and how we navigate the world, in that way. And I think you can write about that. You can definitely reflect on that. Even if you don't get perhaps the answers or the interaction you would like, reflect on that, because I think that in itself exposes those layers of, complexities that exist within relations, but also with other aspects as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's just it would be so good that when we co-design, they follow up research to have their opinion, their input, but it's so hard.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Thank
Thank you for asking that question. Sorry.
I was just gonna comment on the idea of like co-design, that I find a lot of times with groups, if people who are quite different than myself, some people will come forward and are happier to interact. Those are the people I would start with, because then they're the bridge to the people who maybe were less comfortable, and then they may be doing the interviewing. My co-designer's not myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you got some great suggestions there. good luck with that, and yeah, and try it. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. You just reflect
Sure,
on it.
yeah.
Yeah, you just reflect on it, and you say what you have to say, and then you got to think about, okay, how could I do it differently next time?
Bye.
You know.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Welcome.
Maybe ask the participants themselves, am I the right person to be talking to you about that? Because then you gain another insight of how to adapt the studies for the future. So I've actually found the case, because I do quite a lot of sexual assault stuff. So male participants who have experienced sexual assault, I found that they won't be forthcoming with a male, but they will be forthcoming with a woman. And purely that's just different power dynamics and stuff like that. So it can come from the opposite as well. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, great. That's a very interesting point. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Yep, good luck. I can do one more question, and after that, I think we'll wrap up the online bit. Any questions? Online? Any more questions? No? All right. Well, we'll leave it there.
Can't see
Again,
any more.
yeah, thanks for that, Andy. Again, thank you so much for your engagement and your time today to come and listen. This is just the beginning. There's so many resources and things. As I said, Caroline's book is great resource, and I've given some on the slides as well of some things you can refer to. And what I'll try to do for the group that are here, we'll try to collect a list perhaps of resources and other things you guys may have come across that's helpful, and we can share that with each other to create that community of, sort of practice around these things. So thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much,
class.
Rose.
Yeah,
There's a
thank
lot of
you.
thank yous for you
Yeah.
in the chat here from the participants, and there's also people saying they love to see Audrey Lord so prominently featured in your presentation.
Yeah,
So thank
great.
you so much.
Thanks for that, Amy. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely
Bye.
rest of the day. Take
Bye,
care.
folks.
Bye. All right, maybe we can take.
Welcome everyone to the second afternoon session of the Community of Practice for Inclusivity in queer, trans and intersex for queer, trans and intersex people. So for those of you that weren't in the morning, I guess Karen Fisher and I will talk for about 20 minutes about accessibility, and then there'll be some opportunity to ask some questions. So that part's going to be recorded. And then we'll stop the recording and we will workshop some of the work that some of you have really generously shared with us. So welcome everyone. Yeah, I mean, as part of Diversity Festival and just the way that we always do things, I'd really like to acknowledge the Bejigal people that are the traditional custodians of the land that UNSW sits on. The land that we're on now was typically used actually as like a learning space for the Bejigal people. So I think it's really great that we can continue that way, and just really important that we continue to think about the importance of Indigenous knowledges. And yeah, I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are joining us today. So, I mean, I'll introduce myself a little bit, and then maybe Karen can introduce herself. So I'm Izzy Burton-Clark. So I'm a project officer as part of the UI and RLE partnership, which is part of the UNSW Division of Societal Impact, Equity and Engagement. I sort of have also worked at the Disability Innovation Institute at UNSW and did a placement with Karen 4 years ago now, I think, at the Social Policy Research Centre, sort of looking at disability and co-design. And yeah, like I have lived experience of disability. I'm also a queer, so yeah, I guess lots of intersectional identities. And yeah, accessibility is kind of really important to me. Okay, Karen, would you like to?
Thanks, Izzy. So I'm Karen Fisher. I'm at the Social Policy Research Centre. I work across the university though with lots of people because a lot of my work is collaborative and in the community. I'm a queer, non-disabled woman. And in my research teams, I work with people with all sorts of intersectional experiences because that's good research. So really excited to be here today to share and learn from each other.
Thank you, Karen, and yeah, thanks everyone for coming and welcome. And like I said we've got time for questions, but look, if you've got anything, just please ask it. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can sort of start by looking at accessibility. So, look, accessibility is important in and of itself, but it also carries with it particular benefits to research. I think a lot of the time, accessibility is often assumed to just be about disability, which is really, really important, but it can also include things like gender and sexuality and culture, and just different ways of doing things. So, I mean, I think one of the most important things about all research is that it is relevant. And co-design and accessibility are one of the ways that you can make sure that your research is actually relevant to the areas that you're studying, to the people that your research is going to impact. And look, actually, I think an important note is that increasingly, a lot of you in the room, a lot of researchers are actually going to be part of those communities anyway. And that's a really, really good thing. Yeah, and I think, there's a history of inequitable power relations in research. There are a lot of groups that are historically over-researched, but not in ways that is meaningful to them, that is beneficial to them, in ways where they get to control what's being done and then what happens to that research afterwards. And one of the ways that you can start to redress this and to sort of change those practices is through making your research accessible and then also co-designing or co-producing your research. And it also, it's not just about necessarily, I guess, marginalized people or populations, but accessible research is good for everyone. Even if you don't, I guess, identify as neurodivergent or queer or anything, we are still all human beings, and human beings are all inherently different and diverse. And so by making your research accessible, you're benefiting everyone. Like, everyone's going to benefit from that. Okay, so this is kind of, similar in that apart from accessibility and co-design, especially accessibility, especially being really important in and of themselves, it just makes your research more likely to be impactful, to be relevant, to actually matter. I think as well to make sure that you're researching things that actually, matter, that are priorities for the areas that you're researching. You might have an idea, I guess, of what needs to be done. And look, it might still be, I guess, a problem that needs to be researched or, fixed, for want of a better term, but it might not be a priority for people. There might be other things that are, I guess, more important, that are more pressing. And you're not going to know that unless you ask and unless you do things alongside people. And again, like, there's sort of a bit of a balance between, I guess, asking people what they need, but then also doing the work yourself to, I guess, anticipate and think about ways that you can do this already. So there are already so many resources online through communities about how to make things accessible. And one of the ways that you can start making things accessible is to not have to make people repeat those things again and again and again. You know, you're always still going to have to ask people because, you know, identities aren't a monolith. Like everyone's different. What makes something accessible for one person might make it inaccessible for another. And so you still need to ask and you still need to have those conversations and have those lines of communication open. But the more work that you can do to think about these things, to access what's already been written, the work that's already been put out there, the more accessible you're going to make things. I think I'll probably after this, I think I'm probably going to not say accessible for about a month. You know, and it's a process. It's not necessarily going to be perfect, and no one's really asking for that. You know, but imperfect accessibility is better than no accessibility at all. And most people appreciate effort that you're putting in and do want to meet you, you know, where you're at. Yeah. So there's something that I've said a few times, and that's co-design. So ideally, all co-designed research is going to be accessible. I think Karen and I know that sometimes that's not the case, but like, ideally it's going to be, and it's important that it is. But it's co-design is a different thing to accessibility. So co-design is actually producing the research process. So whether that's like inception through to design, through to data collection, to analysis, to reporting, it's doing that alongside the people that you're working with and that your research impacts. And, you know, that can include the, I guess, traditional researchers themselves. Like, as I said, so many of us here actually belong to the communities in which we're working with. It's also got a lot of evidence behind it. You know, there's already quite a wide evidence base, and it's increasing and increasing, about the effectiveness of this research, the rigorousness of this research. And there are a lot of different and flexible ways that you can use it. You know, I heard some of you talking about like photo elicitation and photo voice earlier. You know, there are a lot of methods that you can use under the co-design methodology. So if you think of co-design, I guess, as kind of like the overarching methodology, you know, the kind of theory and the reasons that you're doing things. And then that works with a wide variety of methods, from quant research to fold to mixed methods. There are a lot of things that you can apply it to. You know, even if you're not co-designing the whole I guess, gamut of your research, each stage still needs to be accessible. So. And I guess one of the principles of co-design as well is that it is never just research for research's sake, but it also needs to have, I guess, a particular purpose in mind, which I think honestly is all good research. So some of you, there's a the UNSW Disability Innovation Institute has produced two sort of guides to inclusive research, to accessible research. These are available online. There are some hard copies over here. And then some of the principles of co-production are like power sharing, which sorry, I just realized the new one's not showing up in the room. Oh no, I think I've accidentally. It's changing on my screen. Like Andy and the people online, are my slides changing for you?
The slide I can see is what is the accessible co-design.
Yeah.
Like they were changing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try not unsharing and then resharing.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Oh, okay. I think maybe my laptop has disconnected from the Wi-Fi.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, it is. Oh, okay. Thank you.
All good now.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Yeah, so principles of co-production. So one of them, as we talked about earlier, is power sharing, and that can be really difficult for researchers and for institutions like universities to do. I think, we get scared about what might happen, but it's a key to co-design. You have to allow the people that you're working with to make choices, and you have to enact those choices. And you have expertise as a researcher. That's not to say that you don't bring your expertise into things, but you have to acknowledge the expertise that's also outside of the university. I think, like the diversity is important as well. And there's already so much diversity at UNSW, but there's even more outside. I think the more that we bring people in, the better your research is going to be. And then we've got, like accessibility. So about making sure that as many people as possible can easily access, can take part in your research. Reciprocity. So it shouldn't just be you that is benefiting via publications, via research grants, the people that you're working with have to get something out of this as well. And flexibility, which is, like really important. It's really important that you anticipate that you might need to change some access requirements to make it more accessible. And building in that sort of flexibility from the get-go and I guess an openness to that is really important. And transparency of being clear about what you're doing, why you're doing things. Sorry, everyone. Now I've lost the control of the slides. Okay. Okay, there we go. So there are sort of two aspects to accessibility that you can think about building in. I think they're both needed and they're both important, but they both have different, I guess, principles. So the first one is kind of speaks to what I was talking about earlier about anticipating and doing your research about building in that accessibility from the get-go, and that's called universal design for accessibility. So it's, it is a reasonably well-known term. You can have things like universal design for learning, and the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design in Ireland defines universal design as the design and composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people. And it's a fundamental concept, aspect of good design. So some of the things that are really important about this are sort of an equitable experience. So trying to make things, I guess, as close to the same as possible for people. Flexibility, which I spoke about. I think predictability is a really important thing. I think people should be able to reasonably know what to expect if they do a certain thing. Information needs to be perceptible, so it needs to be able to be understood. And sometimes that might include things like easy read if you're working with like people with intellectual disability or people who are new to English. I think that open attitude to learning and to making mistakes, I think both for yourself and for others is really important. And just taking out as much physical and mental, including emotional effort as you can for people to access your research processes. And again, this is useful for everyone. Not just people who might have different access needs than we normally think about. So that's really important. That universal design is really important, but you also need to be responsive to what people tell you about their access needs. So, you know, someone might come and identify an access need that's not in there, and you don't go, well, I've used universal design for accessibility, so it should be like, you know, I think everyone's kind of had those experiences. You know, you're not going to be perfect. You and the people that you work with, and you know, even people in the community don't know everything. And the best people to know about their own access needs is the person themselves, is the individual themselves. So while you need to think about that universal design, you do need to as well listen to what people are saying, and you need to build in time, and you need to build in space for people to be able to talk to you about that. So these are the Disability Innovation Institute's inclusive research guidelines. So they're available on that website, so disabilityinnovation.unsw.edu.au. If you just Google doing research inclusively, you get it. And we've got some hard copies in the room as well. Okay, Karen.
Right, so it all sounds very obvious, doesn't it? But remarkably, very few people do it. And so I think it's really important at this stage to pause and go, well, why don't we make things like this? What are the reasons that we cut corners and we don't think about asking or responding? And I guess the four main ways that you think about those barriers, and of course all barriers can be overcome, but thinking about those barriers is really just that first step of making assumptions about people's capacity and interest. I really like the way that Izzy said, you know, taking time, making space. And a lot of that is, you know, we rush. I rushed to get here. And so I rushed and I assume I know who's in the room. I assume I know what you want. But actually stopping and questioning those assumptions as a researcher is very important. The second, of course, is that it's a bit scary because as researchers, we're meant to know what we're doing. People look up to researching. You know, it's a reified intellectual exercise doing research. And so it's assumed that we know how to do this. There's not actually very much written about it, despite the fact that this is not a new concept. And that's why these manuals that the Disability Innovation Institute are so important, because it's actually one of the first times that all of those bits of knowledge have been brought together. So there are ways of filling those gaps around knowledge, but the first part is to actually acknowledge that we don't have the knowledge and face that fear. Oh, I don't know how to make this website accessible. What am I going to do that? Oh, too bad. I'll just exclude those people. The next, of course, is it takes time and it costs. However, if we start our research assuming that we're committed to accessibility, then we build that into the process. So it might mean, for example, that because we know it's going to take time and it costs, that we do less of something else. What we do well, we do well and we make it accessible. And so we build that into our time frames and into our budgets. So there is no way for me as a disability and mental health researcher that I would ever say, oh, well, I can't afford the time, I can't afford the cost. I'm just going to do it this half-assed way. No, of course not. I have time and I have cost and I prioritise that accessibility. So it's not an excuse. Also, for those of you who are at the stage of going through your ethics processes, there are ethical concerns about how to manage inclusive practice, especially ethical concerns from researchers who are not familiar with accessible processes. So, for example, one of the things I'm doing this morning is addressing comments from the ethics committee about, well, you know, how am I going to overcome that bias if I'm using co-design, or I've got people with intellectual disability who I'm employing in my team and they're going to tell me who it is I should speak with. So that sort of basic question of, well, the overlap between methodology and ethics and the frames that I use, the rights to participate in research are ones that we need to both reflect on ourselves, but also to advocate among our colleagues as other researchers. So what this means then is, if you are committed to accessibility in research, and I assume you all are because you're here, there's lots of opportunities for accessibility in the research process. And I think Izzy's probably gone over most of this.
We might be back to slide 1.
No,
Okay.
yeah, probably a good summary clue. In terms of where is it that as researchers yourselves, so now thinking about your own research project, where is it that you're building in accessibility? So most of us, especially in a university environment, are not using a full co-design process, but we can still be very much committed to accessibility within that. So how is it that we build in accessibility in the way that we are defining our social problem, the way that we're defining and designing our research question? So thinking the sort of principles that Izzy has outlined here, how within the institutional constraints of a university are you going to do this, or are you doing this? How are you designing your research methods? How are you going to conduct those methods? Who's going to conduct them? And how are you analysing the data and then using the findings? So across the whole process and then through each part. And it's, I think with that commitment to accessibility, you can question yourself at each part as to where to build in the best accessibility within the constraints.
Okay, so we've got a few case studies, I guess, of how Karen and I in different projects have built accessibility into it. So the first one I'll talk about was some research that I was involved in. It was both research that involved some community workshops. So it involved a scoping review of what had already been written about gender and sexuality diverse people's. Oh, sorry, yes.
Can you just read out the heading of?
Yes, no, so yes. So it was about yeah, like so the title was Reimagining Menopause by Expanding Assumptions Shaping Research, a scoping review of gender and sexuality diverse people's experiences and expectations. So it was about I guess acknowledging that the experiences of menopause that we often research, that we often see, that we often talk about are those of cis straight women. And that we needed to expand these understandings for both cis non-straight women, but then also for trans and other gender diverse people who also go experience menopause as well. But one of the things that came up, so part of making this as accessible as possible was putting in from the get-go really broad, expansive and inclusive definitions of gender and sexuality. You know, there are a wide range of ways that people like to talk about themselves and their gender, and that's actually really exciting. It's not, you know, it's often, I think a lot of the times, especially in the hard sciences, I guess when you have, limited amounts maybe of people that are being thought about in studies, this idea of having all these multiple different ways of expressing your identity is actually really exciting. So we built that in from the get-go and had really open ways that people could express who they were. And that included those of us that were on the research team. But apart from these expensive definitions of gender and sexuality, which is one really important way that we made it accessible, we also thought about other accessibility concerns as well. So we had like hybrid options for the workshop. So people could come and join us in person, but they could also join us online. So that was for people who maybe have, weren't living in Sydney where the workshops were for. This was for maybe people who were sick on the day. This is for people who, have disabilities that maybe made it difficult for them to come in, maybe had caring responsibilities. So that's just one of the ways that you can then increase your participation in this really important topic by just making it as easy as possible for people to join in, and not have to ask for that as well. We were still really open to people explaining their accessibility requirements for us, but by building that in from the get-go, that said to people, we want you there. We want you to be involved. It's really important to us that you come and tell us what your experiences of menopause are. Yes.
Ask a question here. I appreciate the spirit of what you're saying here, and I'm talking about the first point, expansive rather than limited definitions. So sometimes when we expand definitions, we include a lot of people. And in a social science type where we're not doing a massive survey and getting thousands of people, this can make the study shallow. And at the same time, there are under-researched groups which remain under-researched because we've expanded the definition so much. And so my question is that maybe sometimes it's not good to have an expansive definition.
That's a really good point. And I think we needed it because the whole point of the menopause study was that we had these really limited definitions. But you're right, like we might have been doing something where actually we were looking at a particular group of people. And that's where actually that type of accessibility or that type of definition, would not be appropriate. So it's absolutely needs to be suited to your study. And this is because the reason that we needed those broad definitions was because we needed to include a broader understanding of that. But you're right, like sometimes that's not going to be appropriate. So Jennifer.
I think it just comes down to having a clear expectation at the beginning. So if you are being, like I know certain groups in terms of like the trans identity and health relationships, and like in Acorn in particular, and sometimes they don't, they will call out and say, look, we just don't have the capacity to do trans experience. They name it and they say why and they give their explanation. It's very different than assuming that they were just not engaged with the conversation because they were forgotten about, which is the bigger concern that I come across. At least from my experience, I'd much rather someone come out and say like, hey, we are excluding this cohort because of X, Y, and Z. We did think about it. We had funding constraints, but here is other avenues.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. That's a really good point. And like I think if you're specifically studying, say, like trans women, then you just want people that are trans.
Because I wouldn't call that excluding someone. I would say that's the scope. So if I was talking to people who were ADHD and was not talking to people who were autistic, doesn't mean I'm excluding autistic people. It means I'm speaking to people who have ADHD and people who may have ADHD and be autistic. But I don't think that I would use the term exclusion to say if I'm not studying this group and
I think it's purely based on we probably have different associations with the word exclusion. I just come from a different discipline, so my version of exclusion is just it is not A, so you have exclusion sort of thing. Sorry.
Andy's also put a question in the chat which I think we can address now. So broad question, both this session and this morning on intersectionality was talking about the importance of time, that co-designed, accessible / inclusive research takes time and attention. I'd love to know your advice for HDR students who have all those time frame pressures to build this into their project and timelines. I think Karen, I might throw to you.
Sure. Look, everything takes time, and in the end, it's time management. One thing I learned probably decades ago now about evaluation is they said if you spend a third of your evaluation time on design and 2/3 on the actual evaluation, you're going to do it much better than if you say, oh, well, I've got to get on with it. So my advice on this is actually that first year of design, if you're doing a 3-year degree, is absolutely vital, because otherwise you don't do all of these processes of thinking of the principles that Izzy has listed there of, you know, what's the question? Why am I asking this question? Am I asking it with the right concepts? Am I asking it with the right people? So to me, it's actually the priority.
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. Did you want to talk about this one, Karen, or then on the next one? Because I think we've run out of time to do both.
Yep. So we can share the slides.
Oh, yes, of course.
So I'm going to talk about the context of doing research for the government. And the reason I choose this example of where we prioritised accessibility in this project, as we do in all of our projects, is because often when we go to a research project, there's an assumption that we don't have time for accessibility, or that's not the priority. And yet you can turn that around. So this is a project that was commissioned by the government to ACOLA, which is the Australian something or other about learning academies, College of Learning Academies. So this is all of the big wig professors, emeritus, all of those, who supposedly know everything there is to know, and that's why people go to ACOLA, but of course they don't. So one of the first parts of designing this project was to go, well, thanks for contacting me, ACOLA. I'm not actually the person with lived experience. What we need to do is to get a co-chair who is a person with disability. We need to make sure that the management structure is set up so that there are people with disability and other people with an interest, that we employ people who have disability, lived experience, that we have advisors who are people with disability, and that we finally, through all of those layers, actually speak with more diverse people with lived experience. And the impact of having those conversations and explaining why is that then that changed the whole focus of this project, which actually started out with quite a different name. It was about, I think it was called Disability Confidence, which from the perspective of people with disability was actually the wrong question. We want you to respond to our needs. We don't want you to be confident in yourself. And it changed what and how we did it. So it's an example of we're actually spending the time to explain what the difference of accessibility and co-design means to asking the right question and then getting an answer that is useful for policy, was well worth that investment. This is the other one.
Yeah.
Which
we can send these around. Yeah, so we've got some resources on the side, so I appreciate that these are long links. Yeah, we will send these slides around, and I'll include these links as well. There's Karen's and my contact details, so feel free to reach out, and I'll be included in everything. So yeah, I mean, does anyone have any further questions about the case.
Just go off share in case anyone else.
Oh, yes. And you can, if you share your feedback, you can to a diversity festival, you have a chance to win an official FPOS gift voucher. I was told to include that, but I think you will also get a link to the survey. Okay, stop sharing.
That definitely improves the inclusion.
Yes.
Oh, that's okay. So thanks for sharing. I was wondering about that project with government and how, as you said, the way you phrased it was, oh, thanks for contacting me. I need to do this and this and this. So was that a request for quote that you got for this? And then you were like, and then in the way that you pushed back on their original kind of framing was through your response to the request for quote, or how did you originally push back, or was it a phone conversation? How did this initial like pushback happen? I'm just curious. Okay, because I'm interested in how funding and resourcing happens for projects to achieve co-design and accessibility outcomes that we want.
Sure. And I'm aware the recording is still going.
Yes. Yes.
So I think I can.
We can always edit it out, Karen. We can always edit it out.
No, I don't mind being direct, but I am aware that this is.
Yes.
So this Ecola example is probably not a good one for that, because Ecola is the learned academies.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a request for tender. It was just something that we do as a member of the academy. But generally, yes, we're doing that in two steps. One is how we respond to a request for tender. So we don't ever say well, yeah, we'll just do what you want.
Yeah.
We say, yes, this is the way we'll do it, and it has to be accessible for this reason. We might understate that in the formal response so that we get it. These days don't usually have to, but certainly 20 years ago we had to. And partly that is our choice about which ones we're prepared to go for or not, and which ones we're prepared to lose. So some, for example, we will respond to them and say, in order to make it accessible, your budget and time is just not possible, and we won't win it. That's fine.
Yeah.
Because it's not worth doing it badly.
Yeah.
But then I think the more important part of your question is, once we are starting a project, we then take weeks or months to work out with the funder how to make it accessible.
So I understand how like a larger institute can probably have that pushback, but for like a smaller institute, how would you engage in that?
So I guess by a smaller institute, you mean a person, is that right? Or a
smaller universities. So I'm from the University of Newcastle. We're a regional university, and funding is like gold around the place. Any type of funding will make or break anything. Everything has to be done in certain aspects, and the pushback is insane. And so we never get to that negotiation stage. It's always, okay, well, we must do X, Y, and Z.
So I think there's a couple of ways of answering that. One is as you as an individual researcher. So where is your code of practice? What are you prepared to do as what you know is good, rigorous research? So I would argue that, especially in the areas that we all work in, rigorous research means that it is accessible, and you wouldn't want to or agree to do inaccessible research. And at an institutional level, I think that's also fairly similar. So when we are competing for research, commissioned research, our competitors are not, it's more between, say, an academic environment, like any university, or the consultants. So, for example, EY or Deloitte, who are never going to put in the same considerations because they don't need to. And so UNSW would not be winning out against Newcastle just because it's big or small. It's more about the quality of what's in the application. We are also never going to write an application that looks the same as a consultant's application, particularly the big consultants. So, of course, they do good work for that particular purpose, but it's a different purpose, usually. Sometimes it's the same and sometimes we partner with them, but usually it's quite a different purpose. In my area, work done for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, for example, often we won't go for that work because what they're looking for is a large consultancy type project, and that doesn't comply with our requirements for academic rigor. Happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I think we'd have to go into much more specific detail to
Exactly.
really get to the heart of my question. Which
Yeah, looking forward to coffee.
Yeah. But you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think I know exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I think that concludes kind of the talk portion of the afternoon. So yeah, I think we can get started on workshopping some of the work that's been shared. I think
awesome. Thanks so much, Izzy and Karen. There's just thank yous online from a couple of folks, and just folks saying they had to kind of head off to another meeting. But yeah, thank you from me as well. It's a really interesting session, and I learned some things as well in this discussion. So it's fabulous to hear from both of you. Izzy, you did not mention your honours topic that you've just submitted.
Actually, that's
exploratory research.
Now, while we're still on
Actually, because I guess I was inclusive.
Yeah, inclusive research. It's a critical inclusive research. Yeah.
So I just last week submitted my criminology honours, which was on the topic of the understanding of narcissism in true crime podcasts.
Ooh.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, look, yes, yeah.
Publication coming out soon.
So Andy was one of my supervisors for that, and no, I think it was sort of looking into, I have not been diagnosed with narcissism. I am neurodivergent, but I'm not that type. So that was very much led by, I think, both noticing as an autistic person the way that narcissism was discussed in true crime podcasts, that it was quite similar to the way that I think a lot of discussions around autism as the cause of harm and violence was discussed. And then also, it is really, really difficult to find these, but actually people that have been diagnosed with narcissism talking about, I guess, the stigma and the way that narcissism is spoken about. What we know from increasing empirical research is that it is a condition that is linked to severe childhood trauma. And I think the really important thing is that it's blamed for a lot of things like domestic violence, like murder. But, not everybody who uses harm and violence is narcissistic, and not everybody that is narcissistic uses harm and violence. So when we kind of act like it does, that just throws all people with like mental illness or disabled people under the bus as being the causes of violence, when actually, you know, we're far more likely to have violence used against us. So yeah, I think just like questioning those kind of accepted notions of, you know, harm and deviance and crime, using information from, I guess, like people that have been diagnosed with this, but then also similarly to like people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is another really stigmatized diagnosis that's linked to trauma. Yeah, maybe tackling psychopathy next. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
There's so much to be done.
So many podcasts.
Yes, but no, Andy, we said with Kev, my other supervisor, we'll put out some podcasts about the
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, yeah, well done, Izzy. And thanks so much, Izzy and Karen, for such an interesting session. So I'll turn the recording off and I'll pop off now.
Okay, bye, Andy. Thank you.
Thanks so much. See you. Bye.